In 1924, Albert Ostman, a Canadian gold prospector, decided that he was going to scout a new area near the Toba Inlet in British Columbia to see if it had any gold yield. Ostman was accompanied to the area by a Native American guide. However, when they reached a certain point, the guide refused to go any further, and he warned Ostman to do the same because the area was the domain of man-beasts. Ostman thought this was mere superstition and trekked on alone. Problems soon arose as Ostman set up his tent for the night. He would awaken each morning to find that an animal had silently been through his belongings in the night. At first, Ostman thought it was a bear, but he was confused as to why there were no claw or tooth marks on his belongings. On the fourth night, as Ostman slept in his sleeping bag, he claims he felt a huge hand grab him, heave him over a massive shoulder, and began carrying him through the forest. After what felt like an eternity, Ostman was finally put down, and he was horrified to see he was on a plateau, miles away from his campsite, and surrounded by 4 huge hair-covered creatures. The beasts did not attack Ostman, but they also did not let him leave their sight. He was forced to live with a family of creatures, which he described as a mother, a father, and 2 children for an entire week. Though he had his gun, he feared they were so massive that shooting one would only make the others angry. One day, the huge male grabbed his snuff box and ate the whole contents, then ran off in search of water. While the family was panicked, Ostman claimed he made a run for it, grabbing only his gun, and ran for his life through the woods until he got to a river where he was picked up by rafters. Ostman kept his story a secret for 24 years until in 1957 he finally came forward and told a national newspaper. Jeannie Chapman was startled one afternoon in September 1941 when her young son came home terrified, claiming to have seen a cow coming out of the woods next to the house. Perplexed as to why a cow would have had her child so scared, Jeannie walked onto her porch where she saw a very large, dark shape moving through the underbrush. Thinking it was a bear, Jeannie called her other 2 children inside, but after realizing it had been spotted, the creature raised up to its full height and stared straight at the shocked family. Jeannie realized that this was no bear. Instead, she described it as a giant man covered in dark brown hair. The huge beast began to head straight for Jeannie and the kids. Jeannie quickly took her children and fled to the nearby town, where she took refuge with friends. There she exclaimed that her husband George would soon arrive home from work, and the creature may be waiting for him. Luckily, by the time George did get home, the Bigfoot was long gone, but his home had been ransacked, his front door caved inwards, and a 55-gallon barrel of dried fish had been smashed open, and its contents were eaten. After reuniting with his family, George gathered a group of men with guns and dogs to wait in his house the next night to see if the creature would return. And while at one point in the night the dogs went berserk, nobody ever spotted the creature, only its huge footprints in the dirt the next morning. The Chapmans, no longer feeling safe in their own home, moved away from Ruby Creek the following summer. But this is not where the story ends. Some Native American traditions state that to see a Bigfoot is a bad omen, and those who encounter one will die soon. The Chapmans' youngest daughter died of an illness just the following year, and their 2 sons, as well as Jeannie and George, were all drowned when their canoe capsized. Every member of the Chapman family was dead just 3 years after their Bigfoot encounter. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. I was camping in the Shenandoah Mountains in Rockingham County, Virginia. The date was October 2017. It was nice fall weather, so I decided to go out for the weekend. When I arrived, a local ranger pointed out a hiking trail for me to follow. After a hike over the mountain, there was a nice area of flat ground near a stream that was perfect for camping. I hiked a few miles to get to the bottom of the trail. I set up camp, ate dinner, and crawled into my tent. Around 12:30 a.m., I heard a noise outside of my tent that literally scared the hell out of me. I sat upright and listened to the sounds. Soon after, I could hear rocks falling just outside of the tent. By the direction in which the rocks fell, I figured that someone was throwing the rocks downhill from the mountain, but that was over 100 yards away. I slowly crawled out of the tent and peered out into the darkness. The area was extremely dark, and I could barely see my own hands right in front of my face. Then suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps nearby, which were getting closer. I scrambled back into the tent and reached into my pack in order to grab my .44 Magnum. I pointed the gun at the ground in the opposite direction of the footsteps and then let off a round. The footsteps stopped, but I did hear a faint rustling sound going away from me. I quickly reached into the tent and grabbed my sleeping bag. I found a nearby tree and propped myself against it, the Magnum still in my hand. I dozed on and off, frightened at what had occurred. It started to become light, but my nerves were still on edge. I didn't wait around long enough to take down the tent. I had at least a 2-hour hike ahead of me, and I wanted to get out of that area as soon as possible. I started my way up the trail. It was rocky and a slight incline in the beginning. I was about an hour up the mountain when I began to hear the same strange noises I had heard the night before. I picked up my pace until I reached the peak. As I made my way to the top, I saw that there was another lower peak on my left, around 150 yards away. There stood a hairy, human-like figure looking directly at me. I knew that the creature was a Bigfoot. It was massive, at least 8 feet in height. I was so goddamn scared I started to run. At the same time, the beast let out a terrible scream that echoed in the valley below. It didn't attempt to follow, but continued to scream. To this day, I can still hear that scream. It sounded like a low growl at first, then continued into a high-pitched shrill, becoming a long, sustained howling. It most likely wanted me to leave its territory, according to what I've read. It was probably hunting at night and was upset that I'd set up camp. This is the first time that I've shared the story of my encounter with this creature. I doubt if I'll ever go into the wilderness at night again. If you're enjoying the show, go on over to blackwatermedia.net and join the Swamp Hunter Society. Just click on the Become a Member tab on the menu, and for only $4.99 a month, you can have exclusive access to the finest paranormal, horror, and supernatural story narration content available anywhere. It's the ultimate digital audio exploration into mystery, magic, monsters, and myth. Become a Blackwater Media Swamp Hunter Society member today. In the early 90s, I was with the teams in the Navy. We were sanctioned by an alphabet government agency to put a stop to several aggressive Sasquatch in the high country in western North Carolina. We all thought it was a joke at the mission briefing, but it was no joke. My partner in our team of 12 was my swim buddy. He was Native American. This man wasn't scared of anything. Before we were ordered to go out during the briefing, all of these agents were showing us slides of what these creatures did to people, adults and children alike, as well as the damage done to vehicles and homes. Anyway, my buddy turned white with sheer fear. He told me, "This is bad, really bad." When we arrived in the little mountain village town, the sheriff met us. He told us he'd never been so happy to see the cavalry since he'd been in Korea. He showed us the actual places where, as he put it, "This is where those fuckers, those big hairy demons destroyed this or killed him, her, or them, there." My buddy was taking everything in like I never saw him before. After talking with the sheriff, our lieutenant told us to fire up because we were going hunting. As we were getting our gear ready, my buddy said to me, "You know, I always thought my grandfather was just telling me scary stories about he and his brothers when they fought these wild men." We started in around 1400. By 1600, we found lots and lots of tracks. We started tracking them. We made out at least 7 different individuals. We made first contact at around 1930, and it was almost dark. The point man stopped dead in his tracks and spoke in his headset. "I see one, and it's fucking huge." The lieutenant said, "If you have a shot, take it." He shot this massive hairy beast with a 7.62 millimeter round, and it acted like a mosquito bit him. The creature turned around and let out a god-awful roar. The point man quickly switched to full auto. This time the creature dropped like a rock after 10 7.62 millimeter rounds cut up his chest. After first contact, the agents radioed in and said they wanted one alive. Our lieutenant told them to go screw themselves. It took 3 days and nights with almost no sleep, but we dropped 7 hairy bastards. We found the missing people, or rather what was left of them. We had one casualty when a team member was snatched straight up into the goddamn trees. There was nothing anyone could have done for him. To this day, thinking of those 3 days sends chills down my spine. You won't find those 3 days in any military record or mission log. Going into our mission debriefing, where normally we were asked 1,001 questions about every shot fired, every angle we fired from, every angle we fired on, etc., we were simply told that the past 3 days we were doing rigorous mountain training, and during that training period, we lost a man. And with that, the debriefing team stood up and walked out. Now, normally we have individual debriefing for the whole team, but this was the only time it was just team debriefing. So to answer your next question, after 3 days, government agents came in and removed all 7 corpses and flew them out. My message to everyone: don't let anyone tell you that these things don't exist. They do. They're real. They're horrible. And they are the deadliest goddamn things I have ever seen.